Thank you very much, Lorna and Allison. And hi, everyone out there joining via Zoom. We have a great panel lined up for you today with panelists from all over the world. And we're going to be discussing, or I suppose debating, Zoom versus business jets. And so without any further ado, because we have such a large panel, I'm going to begin by introducing the panelists in the order in which I see them. First, it's, and when I introduce them, I'm just going to ask them to say a quick word of introduction about themselves as well. So first, to my right, as I see him, is Yosef. Yosef, would you like to briefly introduce yourself?
Hi there. I'm Yosef Hafiz, working for NASJET out of Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. I'm the Vice President of Sales and Marketing.
Thank you very much. And next to him, as I see him, is David from LUXAVIATIon. Welcome, David. Would you like to say a quick word?
Good afternoon, Paul. My name is David van Langenbergh, LUXAVIATIon Group, President of Aviation Services.
Thank you very much. And next to him, I see Thomas Chatfield of Camber. Thomas, a brief word from you.
Hi, I'm Tom Chatfield. I'm based in Vancouver, Canada. I'm the CEO of Camber Aviation Management.
Welcome, Tom. And next to Tom, we have Toby. Toby, would you like to have a quick hello?
Hi, Paul. Good afternoon. Thank you. Yeah, my name's Toby Edwards. I'm co-CEO of Fly Victor, based in Fulham, London.
Excellent. The next to Toby, I see Jeffrey Lowe joining from, I presume, just down the street from me here in Hong Kong. Jeffrey, you want to say hello to everyone?
Yeah, exactly that, Paul. From Hong Kong, Jeff Lowe. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Asian Sky Group and Asian Sky Media, a media company. So,
thanks, Jeff. And last and certainly not least, I have Adrian Chalker. Adrian, would you like to say hello to everybody?
Hi, I'm Adrian Chalker. I live in Seattle, in the States, and I'm the Director of Custom Services for Adventures Abroad, a Canadian adventure travel company.
Excellent. And I believe that Adrian wins the background contest with two wonderful guitars. I believe I see a Fender back there. But thank you, everyone.
Actually, it's a Rickenbacker and a Gretsch, but I do have a couple of Fenders.
Well, thank you everyone for joining. I was speaking of backgrounds. I was trying to find a nice background, one of these virtual backgrounds, so that looked like a fire, and I was going to call this a fireside chat, but it's just not the same, is it? When we're all gathered virtually like this. So let's dive right into the great debate of today. I suppose we should begin first by setting the scene. You know, the title is catchy and aptly named Zoom versus business jets, but we're not simply talking about Zoom. We're using Zoom as an analogy for all the technology which it represents. And certainly over the course of the past year, there have been quite significant advances in video conference and, in fact, virtual presence technologies. So really, it seems like that type of technology is coming of age, whereas Zoom has sort of quite possibly served its purpose throughout the pandemic, or this pandemic at least. I'm just wondering if anyone in the audience has any thoughts on just the emergence of that technology in general, and where it stands today, and where it might take us, and just your thoughts on maybe using Zoom over the course of the past year itself. So I'll turn over to the panelists. I'm going to first start with just zooming right down the street with Jeff here in Hong Kong.
Yeah, we've if you will, graduated from Zoom, and we're now using a virtual platform called Gather, which allows us to assume an avatar and immerse ourselves into a three-dimensional world. That world can have everything from boardrooms to private rooms to showrooms to auditoriums, venues, you name it, and everyone can join in. And we were talking a little bit before we started where you can literally bump into someone, and just as you would if you were walking down the street per se, but through your avatar, your head, your face is your webcam. It engages right away. You can talk to that person and exchange documents, do everything you would normally do. So it's a little bit more engaging, obviously, than Zoom, and for those of us that are sort of suffering Zoom fatigue, but allows us to take it to the next level. And so, yeah, totally immerse ourselves in a three-dimensional world that's been custom designed for whatever purpose the event may be. So.
That sounds quite interesting. I haven't tried that one, but if I do get to pick an avatar, I'd want mine to be LeBron James.
You can do that. So you can have you can have Marilyn Monroe walking the aisles of a trade show, plastered with Pillsbury to get to, if you want to raise some product awareness, whatever. But that's, it's a virtual world. It's really, the limitation is your imagination. So you can certainly think of some very creative ways. So.
Yeah, and Tom, I know that in your line, particularly when it comes to aircraft completions, some of this technology may have proven useful as well. Have you had any experience with the latest and greatest?
Well, to be quite honest, if it wouldn't have been for Zoom or video conferencing, I think life would have been difficult for all of us in the last 18 months. I mean, most of us have been locked down for long periods of time. And while a phone call is nice, I think virtual or video conferencing is a nice step between not being able to physically meet somebody and at least having a conversation. So in terms of being able to do the work that we do, yes, we're able to do those critical design reviews virtually together. It's a little bit more cumbersome, it takes a little bit more time, but when you start thinking about it, you're not physically traveling to a location and back, so it is pretty efficient. In terms of doing an aircraft survey, to be quite honest, we've been quite fortunate. Camber has a number of people living in different locations around the world, so we've been able to generally bring that person to the aircraft and physically still do that inspection. So we haven't been doing video inspections of aircraft and that type of work. But the video conferencing for us has been essential. With those travel restrictions, our job wouldn't have been possible otherwise.
It's quite interesting. I know, having visited some of our offices around the world, we've invested a lot of money prior to the pandemic in these virtual presence conference rooms, and they're extraordinarily expensive and really the exact opposite when it came to their usefulness. And I'm aware that certainly over the course of the past few months, there have been new products that have come to market that are virtual presence conference rooms light, that are effectively take the form of a mirror, and you can sit down, and it's almost like you're visiting someone in prison, and you're looking at them across the other side of the glass. Not that I've ever visited anyone in prison, or not that I'll admit to, but moving away from that, I think we have a general understanding of the technology and what Zoom sort of represents. But I think the real discussion here, bearing in mind that it's Zoom v private jets as opposed to Zoom versus airlines, is who is the target audience that we're talking about here. There certainly are differences between our target audience, which is ultra high net worth individuals and large corporates, compared to the airline market. So we're talking about private, mostly business travel, and I'm just wondering some of the panel's thoughts on our audience and the differentiators, particularly in this context. So let me start by turning over to Daniel from LUXAVIATIon. You deal with this target audience on a daily basis. I mean, what are some of your thoughts about their characteristics?
Thank you, Paul. Well, I strongly believe that our target audience and the audience that we're discussing about in this panel, the beneficial owners, the deal makers, as soon as they can, they will travel. We see that today happening. If they have a window of opportunity, they do travel. That is for many reasons. I think there's a lot of stuff that maybe we have not thought about, but like the human aspect of sitting together with someone and sharing a meal is so important in making a connection with someone. That is culturally related, but it's very important, and all those little nuances that we all know but we might even not be able to describe. That is happening, and that's why especially these people, they do travel a lot. We have, if I look at our planning today, we have a 200+ fleet in management worldwide, and there is still a lot of activity going around, and that's specifically because decision makers, they want to see in the eye physically of the people they're dealing with.
That's a great point, David. Thank you very much. Yosef, what about you? I know you're zooming in all the way from Saudi Arabia today. Tell us about your principles and their take on, you know, Zoom and flying private, or any other thoughts?
Yeah, that's a good question, Paul. Really, I think that things are going to go back to normal the way they were before. We have quite a large geographical area domestically here in Saudi Arabia. So we're seeing a lot of owners fly domestically to touristic destinations within the kingdom. Whether it's to some of our new projects, like up in the northwestern part of Saudi Arabia, there's a new city being built called Neom, or to the new Maldives, if you will, of Saudi Arabia on the Red Sea, which they're building a bunch of islands right now to replicate sort of or mimic the Maldives or something similar. So we're seeing a lot of domestic flights. They are itching to travel internationally. However, as they book those flights, they're booking them on the private business jets, and then they're changing their minds. And it has to do a lot with quarantine and restrictions on vaccinations, restrictions on traveling to the EU from the Middle East and so on, that they end up changing their mind. So they're still sticking to domestic travel, but as soon as things open up, I believe we're going to see it return to the way it was before.
Thanks, Yosef. Yes, and I think a lot of people may not realize how large Saudi Arabia is, and in fact, I had to look it up myself not that long ago. It's quite sizable geography. So let me just turn it over to Adrian. You know, coming at it from a slightly different perspective, in the more travel and leisure segment, but dealing with similarly situated individuals. What are your thoughts on some of the defining characteristics of this audience, and how that may differentiate them from, frankly, the rest of us?
Well, my perspective is standing back a little bit. I don't know very much about the private aviation industry, but I have a sense of how things are going generally. And of course, with the political situation as it is, well, that's going to probably increase the amount of Zoom and virtual communications, because I think we're probably entering a period of political instability as the American empire kind of morphs and recedes. So I think that will encourage both Zoom, but also with the type of corporate monopoly capitalism we've got, of course, there's a large trickle up. So, you know, the wealth of many different countries are being is being more concentrated in the hands of fewer people. So in terms of the type of aviation, private aviation, that's very good for the business. But it also leads to political instability, which won't be very good for the business. So I think, for example, David, when he said that people want to see face-to-face, this is always going to be the driving factor, I think, in any business. And also, without that, it's very difficult to make better decisions. You need to know the places that you're making decisions about. You need to know the country and the environment and the culture of the different people that you're dealing with. So I think although Zoom and virtual communication will have a stronger influence with political instability and the changes that we're facing, I also think, you know, along as Yosef and David said, face-to-face is going to be an essential part of the future. Thanks,
Adrian. Toby, you know, Victor is very much focused on this target audience and their desire to get there by more private means. So I'd like to hear some of your perspective as well on your exact audience.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, certainly. I mean, I agree with Yosef in terms of the return. We've already seen it, just if we look at May volumes. we're back at 2018, 2019 year-on-year volume. So I don't think fundamentally there's going to be a change there with Zoom online replacing this particular cohort of customers. And I agree exactly like David said, you know, the face-to-face is absolutely essential for this level of individual. And like ultimately we're human beings, and being is about experiencing and seeing people and building relationships. And it's fun. People want to have fun, however wealthy they are. And people who have fun tend to be more motivated and more successful. And I think everyone agrees that these online calls are not as fun as an in-person lunch, dinner, meeting in person, whatever it might be. So in terms of examples of people who have been flying, because clearly we're still in a very restrictive period at the moment, there's a lot of countries, you know, from the UK standpoint, we've got the traffic light systems, but you've got many people with second, third, fourth homes dotted around the place. Of course, in true lockdown, they weren't able to go to those places. So now they're wanting to visit their second homes, for example. There's a whole reason. And people clearly are working from those different places, but still need to get there. And the private jet is an ultimate tool for that. But we've seen it. I think there's almost a whole new cohort of customer off the back of the pandemic, which is the using the private jet, for example, to get a vaccine, right? We've seen people flying from certain parts of Europe to other parts of Europe in order to get a jab. Like, you know, these practical reasons, a bit like going to your second home and checking the boiler hasn't burst or whatever it might be, like general practical things. You need to travel, and you can't do that through this Zoom software.
Zoom is efficient. Zoom is efficient, which gives you more time to have that fun. I mean, as someone who gets on that private jet and travels, he knows that he can still do business no matter where he goes, because he can always get online and do that business virtually if he has to. So I get that people still want to go and have that real life experience, but the Zoom and the virtual realities and the other kinds of platforms that are available allow him to do that and still do business.
That's a really interesting point, Jeff.
I agree with Jeff. I think for the captains of industry, you'll see both. They want to save time, and that's why they will travel. But I see the emphasis now on connectivity on the airplane is increasing. Before COVID-19, because of the budgets involved, there was not always interest to do the investment in the machinery to have SATCOM and the latest and the greatest connectivity. But now this story is changing, and it's because they want both.
Every airplane has KA or KU band now. If you don't, people don't even buy it anymore, or that's the first thing they put in the airplane now.
Yeah, I can say from personal experience, what we've been seeing in the last 18 months is not even just we need a SATCOM, but we need the ability to video conference. So we've got clients that are flying around the world that are actually doing both. They're traveling to go see someone while they're actually video conferencing on the way with a different client. I think I would agree with Jeffrey. There really is an opportunity to do video conferencing to get to perhaps start to know that new business opportunity to those people that you're dealing with. And then at some point, I think all of us want to go and meet that person or meet that group of people and interact and understand each other better, build that level of trust. And then after that, you can start to augment it again with a video meeting or a normal phone call between sessions. I think that they're complementary rather than just one or the other.
But not everyone's like that either. A lot of people can probably do business just virtually, and that's fine. As I said before the sort of in our practice session, 2020 was one of the strongest years we've seen in private aviation in a number of years. And so the deals kept being done, even between the pandemics and all the quarantines and everything else. Last year was a banner year. So the deal still got done without meeting.
You're right.
Yeah, absolutely. I think those are all great points. I mean, they will opt for Zoom over in person on occasion, but I think the consensus is that on the whole that will not reduce their flying. I can't foresee any instance where somebody will decide to do virtual and over going somewhere in terms of sealing a deal or making a personal connection or what have you. And I think it's an interesting point to raise about connectivity. I think the connectivity has gotten on aircraft has gotten significantly better. And I wonder when, not if, we'll get to a point where we'll see the higher end of that connectivity, the virtual presence on aircraft. And surely it can't be that far away, but I don't know. You know, from my understanding, is the virtual conferencing experience on board can be slightly patchy, but certainly not with the latest systems. And I know, Thomas, you've been quite on top of the technology in that regard. Any sense there of how virtual presence ready the aircraft can become?
I think it's all a function of bandwidth. As we get wider bandwidth and higher speeds, we'll be able to do that. I think nothing is more frustrating, as we know just on a day-to-day basis, having a video conference, just a standard one, and people locking up and you're missing conversations. So I think once we get the bandwidth nailed down, and it's not easy. You got to think about this. You've got an airplane that's moving at a high speed, transferring from one satellite to the other. There's a heck of a lot of technology going on there. So in order to make that work, I think we're still a couple of years away from that. But the basis there of being able to video conference right now, it's already there. Now we just have to work on the speeds and refining that system. Well,
David, you're on an aircraft right now, it seems. How's your connectivity?
It's excellent, my friend. It is indeed a matter of bandwidth and technology, but we see giant leaps forward the last decade, and I don't think we're far off. But again, like you said, we'll see both. We'll see people traveling. I mean, the ones on the top of the food chain, they will continue to travel, and then what I strongly believe is that the between level, the usual audience for airline business travel, there that the new era might change things a bit, honestly.
I think that's a great point, actually. We naturally gravitate towards the individuals as we've evidently done in our careers, but there is another part of this, and certainly picking up what Jeff said, the last 12 months have been the busiest 12 months ever for aircraft trading, private aircraft trading. The vast majority have been individuals. However, I do have corporate clients, and I do see corporates buying my individual clients' aircraft as well. So I think that's, and certainly in the United States market and in the European market, that Asia's always been a bit different. Asia and the Middle East have been a bit different because the corporate aircraft has traditionally always been the chairman's aircraft, and anyway, but certainly in the US, we've seen more corporates buying aircraft on the secondary market, so that their senior executive team can feel more confident flying. And these are corporates that have never had aircraft, or not in recent memory, because you remember, not that long ago, it wasn't exactly the fashionable thing to do for an American company, to particularly a public one, particularly ones that were tapping U.S. Government, resources and funding to have their own aircraft. So I wonder if any of you on the panel have had similar experience, and let's can talk about corporates. Keeping in mind that we're talking about private travel, mostly for business. Jeff, have you? I know you're here in Asia, but I know Asian Sky's business reaches far beyond. Have you seen a lot of corporates?
Most of it has been individual, like you said. I guess the interesting, dynamic we have here is a lot of the sellers are from Asia, and the airplanes are going into the U.S. market.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And I mean, I suppose, Toby, for Fly Victor, are you seeing that any of your clients are corporates? And I wonder if anyone's had the same experience on the charter market.
Yeah, more the corporate clients we have tend to be smaller corporates, more like boutique investment banks rather than the big blue chips. But a point I think that you raised, Paul, about the kind of perception of flying privately. I do genuinely, my feeling is that the media are less kind of aggressive with regards to owning a plane. I think there are obvious benefits now in terms of the efficiency of getting from point to point, especially while the commercial airlines are recovering and the routes are down, but also just the safety, right? The fewer touch points, the avoiding the crowd. So I think there's probably more empathy there, although we've not touched on, of course, the climate change factor then is a whole new angle, which probably then counterbalances the old acceptance that, you know, this is too luxury, gold taps, etc., etc. I think everyone knows that's kind of not why people fly privately. People fly privately because it's super efficient and then saves them a lot of time. So I think that's over the last 10 years actually, but especially because of COVID, that's accelerated. And now the obstacles are much more about CO2 emissions rather than you couldn't possibly be seen to be flying privately because it's, you know, golden taps.
Absolutely. And I see that we have a question, a related question from the audience that is asking a question. Will he zoom in, or do I read the question?
Yeah, I'm getting him to join us here as a panelist, just briefly, so he can appear live on the screen. Here he is. Hi, Dawit. How are you?
Hi, everybody. Fantastic. Hope all is well. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to ask this question, and it is very much relative to what you're discussing. You know, with the U.S. showing some of the best recovery to pre-pandemic numbers in terms of aircraft movements, and also historically, the U.S. being a market where a significant number of the passengers in the cabin of a corporate jet were middle management. Not just owners, not just senior executives. You have a marketing manager or middle management sitting in the cabin. Will there be a reduction in middle management use of corporate jets because of platforms like Zoom, or do you feel that the senior executives and or the owners of these corporate jets still recognize the value of in-person meetings, even at that lower level of management?
I have a strong opinion on that, but not really. I mean, what I believe is that those that have been traveling corporate and business jets before, they will pick up doing so as soon as they can. What I do believe is that maybe some, and there was a very good point raised earlier, that some new customers arriving in our sector because they can afford it, but never thought about doing so because it looked like a bit, how would it be perceived by their customers? But now you have the safety pitch of isolating from the masses. That will happen. On the other hand, what I do believe is that the lower middle management that used to fly business class in airlines, I still think that you will see big corporations cutting down on cost and make people do what we are doing today. I mean, when I was a kid, there were two kind of people in my school. There were the Atari guys and there were the Honda motorcycle guys, and you were either one or the other. But now the last year and a half, we have all been pushed and learned to become Atari people. So this is the new reality. I mean, that's my opinion.
No,
sorry, I think there's going to be, as the pandemic starts to decrease, I think there's going to be quite a pent-up demand, especially in middle management, to go and reestablish and reconnect with their clients and with their suppliers. So I think what we're going to initially see, and maybe Toby will be able to prove it in a call or in a discussion in a few months, there's going to be an initial swell of that going on to just get that contact going again and to reestablish the relationships and get things moving forward. And then I think it'll start coming back to how it was previously. Now, one thing I think we really have to understand is that the airlines are not able to take you from point A to point B as efficiently, or even possibly do it in some locations right now. So if you need to meet that client and you need to get the deal going or make things happen, you're going to have to go by private jet because there really isn't any other option at this point. So I think there'll be a swell, and then it'll start calming down as the airlines start picking it up again, and you start being able to make that nice mix between, you know, Zoom and live.
Just to add on to that, Thomas, like, I don't think, obviously travel before cost something, and of course if we're just talking about private jets for business travel, there was an expense there, but I think everyone saw that as an investment, right, to get a deal done that you might not otherwise have got done. In fact, I know a client who, for example, has a helicopter in the Northern England, and he told me that the only way he could do a deal that he got done in Battersea in the UK was because he had a helicopter for that occasion. Okay, so it's similar. It is a real benefit, tangible benefit. But the other thing is, if you're getting a competitive advantage because you're traveling pre-pandemic and now you have a business jet, you're a corporate, you own a jet, or you decide to charter, you're taking the plane anyway. Why wouldn't you take your middle management, your marketing manager, who might just add value, get the deal done? You're only increasing your competitive advantage against someone who's not using business jets. So I think it's going to increase, but I think everybody is far more thoughtful about their business travel. One, because of Zoom or Teams, Skype, but also because of this environmental footprint. And I really think it's less about the cost, because people travel to create opportunities, because in the long term, they think that will make more profit. I think it's less about saving cash and more about, okay, our CO2 emissions halved in 2020 because we didn't do so many business class flights. And it's just similar with the private jets, right? If nobody could fly in April last year. So clearly there's a month where you just couldn't fly. It was pure lockdown, unless you were doing repatriation or it was medical emergency, as far as I'm aware. That was all the flights we were doing at Victor then. So even if you only flew for a month, if you saved a month of your private jet activity, that's still a 1/12 of your CO2 saved just from your aviation emissions. And we all know that aviation emissions are the key contributor to your overall greenhouse gas emissions as a corporate, as a large corporate. So hopefully that adds something.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. There's two really good points in there, and I'd like to address both. One is, and I think we do need to touch on this, is the fact that, frankly, I think we hit the high watermark in commercial aviation in terms of connectivity, just the number of routes and the number of airlines operating routes. You can get anywhere at any point, either direct or with one stopover. And two, just in terms of cost, I still tell people that I flew on a number of occasions from Hong Kong to Johannesburg for less than $400 US. So return, by the way, those days are over. So just in terms of the connectivity, I think that's a really interesting point that someone made, and it also does go to Dawood's a comment as well, because there will be instances where, quite frankly, it is more efficient to fly private in one form or another. And I think with the increasing prevalence of the Fly Victors and your various competitors of the world, that also becomes a realistic possibility for corporates. But moving on, and Toby, thank you very much, because you have identified the elephant in many corporate boardrooms, and that is the ESG angle, and it's going to become increasingly important. And you absolutely are correct. We're all very proud of how small our carbon footprints are this year. You know, I don't think aviation's had a lower carbon footprint than the last time the carbon footprint was this low. It was Orville and his brother flying the Wright Flyer. But we do need to talk about this, because it is important. And you know, some people will make light of it, and some people will say, you know, it's just people pretending to be environmentally woke. But let me ask you, and I'm just going to go right down the line because it's an important one. Starting with Yosef, what are your clients? Are your clients even mentioning ESG? How relevant is it, or isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's a topic we're starting to discuss. And it's funny, it's interesting, because we discussed this in a previous panel about how important CO2 emission is. And the question was asked, do VIPs and principles, ultra high net worth individuals consider that before purchasing an aircraft. And if you want the honest answer, in the past, I would say over the past 10 years, no. They've gone ahead and purchased the aircraft and they didn't really think twice about CO2 emissions. Nowadays, they're starting to change their mind. You see a lot of owners that have downgraded from their BBJs. We're known here in Riyadh, in Saudi Arabia, and in Jeddah for BBJ land. Everything used to be a BBJ or an ACJ, if you will. There were probably about 20 or 30 of them based here in Saudi Arabia. And everybody wanted to travel with the kitchen sink. And now we're seeing a change where people are downsizing, and it's for different reasons, cost-effective reasons, if you will. And we talked about corporates a little while ago. We're seeing chairmen of hospitals, major hospitals here, taking their whole team with them to go visit a site somewhere within the kingdom and then come back the same day. So they want that convenience, they want that privacy. And I believe it's a topic that needs to be touched base upon more. And the ultra high net worth individuals here are starting to consider that. Thanks.
David, I know LUXAVIATION is very attuned to this topic, and as a company takes steps to reduce its footprint. But do you have any particular thoughts on picking up on what Yosef said about the clients themselves and their sensitivity to it? Are you being asked specific questions? And
yes, we do, and I fully agree with what Yosef said, and we also embrace the question, and we encourage people to ask the question. We should not forget that the individuals today deciding to buy an aircraft, they have family, they have kids, so they are being asked at home about green, because that's a very trending topic. Wherever you are, with the world is getting smaller, social networks, and it's all about green. So there is a responsibility to come with a solution, and that's why we as an industry, we need to be smart and be part of this. And I'm really shy of opposing or spending lots of time on giving arguments why we are doing what we do. No, we should explain to people what we are doing to become green, and which steps we are taking, and they should be tangible, real steps, not window dressing. And that is the only way that I see a long-term future for our industry.
Thanks, David. I wonder, does anyone? Well, actually, no. Sorry, Toby. You've identified the issue a couple of times, but I'm also curious about your clientele. I mean, I'm assuming that this is something you're particularly attuned to, because for one, your clients are very attuned to it. And how important is it to them when they're, when you're pitching for their business, or when they're cold calling you or contacting you off the web or whatever?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. I think for context as well, it's important, because if aviation is 2% roughly of greenhouse gas emissions, private jets is only 2% of the 2%. So to begin with, that's interesting. I also think that the sector is doing extraordinarily well as a whole. I think operators, manufacturers, brokers, there has been a really concerted effort to improve things. And there may or may not be some greenwashing in there, but I think on the whole, people accept that if you go right down to the fundamentals, if you want to attract Gen Z millennial workers, they care about the climate. Yes, they might be passionate about aviation. And as an employer, if you want to hire talent and retain talent, you're going to need to show in your CSR and your internal documentation what you're trying to do, at least in what is, let's face it, a really difficult place with aviation. Paul, in terms of, clients, do they care, don't they care? Quite frankly, some clients don't give a damn, and they're like, this is greenwashing. And they might be saying that about the fact that climate change is even happening still, would you believe it? Or they might be saying it about carbon credits. But at Victor, we, like many of our peers and competitors, are doing mandated carbon offsetting with United Nations approved accredited programs, where everything is completely transparent and it's all measurable. And I think it's the transparency and the measuring that's just absolutely key, because you have to start somewhere, and aviation, as we all know, is all about safety. And therefore we can't do anything if it's unsafe. And a good example of that is the sustainable aviation fuel. I think it's now been around for a very long time. Like, it's there, it's ready to be deployed, but it's doing all of the necessary testing and checking what blends, what levels of blend you can do with the biofuel, with the normal fuel, in order for it to be safe for the passengers. And then it's just rollout, education, bit by bit. But having been in the sector for a few years now, you can really sense it and feel it, and things are going in the right way. And there's tangible things such as flying more optimal routes, so burning less fuel in that way, being more efficient. There's all the new great aircraft coming out and how manufacturers are making planes far more efficient, burning less fuel. There's clearly carbon credits and offsetting, which I think done properly is excellent, but it's not a silver bullet. And then there's sustainable aviation fuel. So those are kind of a few of the things that, on the whole, the industry is really getting involved with and making things better as a result. And we've got to keep doing it. And the other thing, by the way, is that there's regular stories now of airlines flying planes, commercial airlines flying planes with 5 people. And, you know, this is a large, with hundreds of empty seats like that. When it used to always be, well, your CO2 footprint as an individual on a jet is far higher than the like for like. But as we hear these horrific stories of planes basically being empty and just flying for the sake of flying to keep their slots, etc., you kind of think, well, actually, if it's a light jet and you've got 4 people and they're doing 2 cities and they're getting their business done that would have potentially taken 4 commercial flights, you know, you start to see these efficiencies on the environmental space as well as on the economical efficiencies.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. And obviously today in 2021, perception is reality. Even where oftentimes the perception doesn't actually match the actual reality. But I can certainly say the number of non-aviation people that know the SAF acronym, for example, always sort of amazes me. But when you start getting into conversations with people about, listen, the actual most important thing that can be done right now is increasing efficiencies through better technologies in the management of air traffic control systems, like the project which NASA is running out. They lose interest, because then if they sort of talk about, no, what about new planes and jet fuel made of eggplants or whatever it is.
Paul,
Tom, I know.
Sorry, Paul, can I just add on that? Like, you hear people say, as someone who works in aviation in private jets, I will speak to people and they say, what do you do? And you say, I work in private jets. And you can see they kind of shut off. They're like, that's awful. But then later in the conversation over dinner, you understand that they have their clothes delivered by a diesel van from Net-a-Porter and they have investments in Bitcoin. And it's like, hang on, this is so complex. We can't be making these big generalizations. Sorry to interrupt.
And Paul,
that's just levels and levels, but go ahead, Yosef.
Yeah, sorry. If I can add something, you mentioned something about the word SAF. Let me tell you this interesting story. I was speaking with a client of ours here in Saudi, a new client, and he used this word and he approached me and he said, we're looking for sustainable aviation fuels. We're looking for aircraft. And it's amazing to hear this in Saudi Arabia, one of the biggest energy producers and reliant on oil production, if you will, for a government-run company to talk about sustainable aviation fuels. And I'm like, we need aircraft that can operate on hydrogen. We need aircraft that can operate on something sustainable that produces less emissions. And I'm like, wow, you know, this is really a topic that's starting to move here in Saudi Arabia. And I think with NEOM, I just answered a question for Yuri. The new city that we're building, NEOM, is going to have 0 emissions, no cars. And that's the push, you know, sustainable fuels and 0 emissions.
Indeed. Tom, have you had, particularly with, I know sometimes you're working with clients that are buying older aircraft and refitting them. Do they ask you to, you know, refit them with fuel tanks that use fairy dust as fuels, or?
No, I think there's sort of two things that you can look at. One is you buy a brand new airplane with latest technology engines, and it's going to burn less fuel, ideally SAF fuel, right? SAF fuel. But there is something that can be argued, and that is by buying a pre-owned aircraft, you're actually also reducing the carbon footprint because you're not manufacturing a brand new aircraft. And I think that's something a lot of people forget. The other thing is when we're refitting the aircraft, the technology in the last 20 years in terms of reducing the weight on an airplane, the completion package is phenomenal. We can get 30% off. Granted, it's a lot of work, but we can get 30% of the weight down if we refit an airplane completely. So by not carrying that extra weight, you're not carrying more fuel to be able to move that extra weight around. So you actually are able to take a BBJ or an ACJ or even a Global that is 15 or 20 years old, invest some time and money into putting in a cabin that's not only lighter, but let's be honest, we don't want cluttered cabins anymore. Things have changed in our views of design. And by getting the weight down, we're going to be burning less fuel. And in some cases, for those people who really want to go the long distance, you're actually able to increase the range of that airplane simply by not carrying so much weight with you. And from a catering point of view, we're starting to see that too. People are starting to understand that you can actually wash a dish and use it again in flight rather than just keep going through dishes. So again, those are all weights. Those are things that we're seeing, and it's making a big impact. And video conferencing is not that heavy on an airplane either. So, you know, you can put all of that in there.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I know that there's a question from the audience. Liz asked a question, and I think maybe we'll get Adrian to field this first. How are we using Zoom and Teams and in-person meetings in a hybrid manner to improve our business? We're not really the focus, but thank you for asking. But I think Adrian, you'd probably have an interesting perspective here, because typically you're dealing with your clients in person, as are many of us. But how do you reach out and touch someone all the way from Seattle?
Paul, sorry, I've just brought Liz onto the screen as well. She's asking the questions. I've just brought her on in case she wants to chip in as well.
Please.
Yeah.
Oh, great. Hey, everyone. And second time today that Yosef's got to see me. Very lucky guy. Thank you for inviting me onto the panel. Loving it. We've been working a lot using Zoom whilst everything is being closed down. And I think there's a huge case for our wonderful, imaginative industry to be really, hey, Yuri, to be really innovative and do more like a hybrid thing. So you can walk people around your aircraft. Maybe if you've got the principal who cannot be there, but his team could be there, or if he wants to show some aspects to his wife. And we've also found that private breakout rooms can be game changing for conversations that you may want to keep as a more intimate thing. I'd like to ask you all, how are you using Zoom or Teams in a hybrid way as we come online, and what do you think is possible?
Well, from the leisure business perspective, from my perspective, one of the ways we've been using Zoom is to keep contact with all the staff members, because we're all working from home. So it's been an essential part of communication to, you know, retain business practices and keep everything going. In terms of hybrid stuff, I've used Zoom on 3 or 4 occasions with clients who wanted a face-to-face because they're not traveling and they're considered, because I design mostly groups and I line produce documentary film crews and stuff. So the types of information that you need to put over are quite detailed, and so a Zoom and a face-to-face has taken the place to some degree from an actual physical meeting. And so it's a very useful tool, but it hasn't become the most dominant feature of our communication. That still remains email and telephone, but nevertheless it does have a place.
Yeah, I agree with Adrian as well, Liz. I mean, we're using MS Teams in our office and it's connected to Outlook. I mean, there's a lot of benefits to it internally. We'll be in the same, next door to each other, and we're still using MS Teams, connecting with everybody else in our office. So having that social distancing is also a big plus using MS Teams or using Zoom, if you will, and it's helpful. Nonetheless, we still get together occasionally within a conference room, keeping the door open and social distancing. So we sort of mix and match. So, and we give those the freedom. Who wants to work from home can work from home. Who wants to come to the office comes to the office, and so on. So it's sort of a 50-50 match between, you know, in person and online as well.
If I can, I think we are using also Teams very actively, and we have the same phenomena. People are actually walking out of a shared office to be alone in that Teams meeting because it's more comfortable doing that way. But on the other hand, I do see a large need for social connection, having just a small talk together, and it is such an important part of life. Also, our business, also as a company, for the mental health of our people, we should not underestimate that. So we can do a lot with artificial intelligence, new hybrid solutions, the Zooms and the Beyonds. But those fine little nuances of just being together as human beings and sharing thoughts and ideas and just have a laugh and have a drink. I'm Belgian, never underestimate the drink. So it's important. It's important to keep us happy, and happiness is good.
Yeah, beer and muscles all day. I know Jeff, I recall at the beginning of this, Jeff made some great points about the technology that they're using. And now you made a joke about LeBron James being my avatar, but Jeff, you're a prime example of this. You guys are doing it.
Yeah, I mean, it's something we're doing in our daily business, and it's something that we offer our clients as well. The opportunity to try a different avenue, certainly when it comes to branding and creating awareness. And certainly for us, we think, like I said, the platform that we've been using, Gather, allows them to take it to another level. And that's important because we all talk about engagement. We all talk about networking and trying to online somehow get more of a personal interaction. And certainly the Gather platform, the one that we're using, we feel is the best one that's out there that allows us to achieve that. And so we've been using it, and it fortunately is resonating with people, and people are trying it, and people are seeing that I think we've all talked about it. I think in the end, there's the two are going to coexist together. A lot of talk about hybrid. I think, you know, the issue you've got is those personal events that we had in the past, the trade shows. You know, they would, you know, you talk to some of the organizers and they got 250 or 300 people, and then they went online and now they get 800. And so they're faced with this dilemma that I've increased my audience like threefold, and we've experienced it on our side as well. And so how do I keep engaged with that audience and yet step back to doing business a little bit the old way too, which is the personal? And so the answer is you do both. And I think going forward, we'll see an MBA or a A-base or an E-base, which has the in-person show in Geneva, if you will, but will have also, if you will, latched onto that, the opportunity to have a hybrid event as well, where people can go to the Static, walk through the airplanes, or visit the Dassault Chalet or the Gulfstream Chalet, meet with whoever they want to, do that online as well. And the great thing for OEMs and everything, it expands their audience. And that guy who can't afford to go to Geneva, he can still go to the show now, and he can still get engaged and maybe get that first time experience of walking through a TEDx and going, wow, or walking through an Airbus or something and going, wow. And the technology is also such that, you know, you can have a guy who comes into the cabin and he says, wow, but, you know, I'd like it this way. And you can reconfigure it for him and get him to come back in the next day and show him what it looks like. Well, this is what you asked for, and this is what we can do for you. Put his colors in, reconfigure the floor plan and everything else. And so the engagement level, and therefore the ability to keep him online and keep him with you and respond to him with these virtual platforms is greatly enhanced. And we were talking about it earlier about that allows you to be so efficient as well. Yes, if it can be, it's great to have that beer, but frankly, guys, there are a lot of guys out here that don't need the beers, okay? And a lot of guys, we talked about corporates before, Paul, that, you know, they're, for lack of a better word, they're institutional buyers.
Yeah.
they don't care about trust, okay? I'm buying an airplane. I got my team. We're going to do our due diligence. We're going to tick our boxes. And if it ticks all the boxes, we're going to buy your airplane if we can come to a deal. I don't care whether I trust you or not. I'm only interested in your airplane. I don't have to like you, okay? So a lot of it isn't necessary either. A lot of people can do that online. Thank you very much. So
yeah, it's a really good point. A couple of interesting things came out from what you said. But first, I just want to thank you for representing de Havilland with your shirt. Go Canada!
I tell you,
greatest aircraft.
They just don't make airplanes like they used to. What can I say?
even so that actually, a lot of what you said leads me to a good audience question. Gil asked, once we get back to being in person, are executives going to be comfortable using Zoom at all to build trust with their new customers? And actually, what I want to carry that on to is, are people going to be comfortable having face-to-face meetings? And again, we're now talking about corporates more than anything, but also about the principals as well. I can mention, you mentioned that some of the big online conferences, they have 800 people. Certainly my experience has been probably 799 of those people are like bots from China. Actually don't exist, but recently
they're not from China. They're not in China because they can't get through the firewall. Okay.
Yeah, that's true. Like some of them are just like, is anyone there? But the interesting thing is, so on Monday, this, but on Monday we actually had an in-person event in Hong Kong. There's 150 people that attended, aviation people that attended. And I got to tell you, at the beginning session, and I've been to a lot of conferences like all of you have, at the beginning session, the networking session, I was sort of watching people, and there was a bit of awkwardness because it's been so long, right? So even though we said, look, it's fist bumps and elbows only, so forget about the awkwardness trying to go like this. People were just, how do you do this? How am I supposed to interact with people again? And we've had it pretty good in Hong Kong in terms of, not having as many limitations on social distancing. But I know we talked about this before, and I know we're running out of time, but I'm gonna turn to everyone's sort of last tweet. But Jeff, I want your tweet to be, because we did talk about this before we got on, and you were mentioning, and I've seen this as well, we talk about the characteristics of our customers. Do you want to talk about quickly, are your customers getting older or younger, and what impact do you think this is going to have? And then I'm just going to go straight down the line for last thoughts, last tweets.
Yeah, I mean, they're definitely getting younger, not too surprising. And, a lot of guys are, they're unicorns, okay? And, that 3 weeks ago they weren't, now they are. And so this is the dynamic you're dealing with. And frankly, Gen Y, millenniums, they're online guys. They're using their smartphone. They use it all the time. And so that's the medium that they communicate with people. That's the medium that they build trust over. And those are who the buyers are going to be. And those are who I think when we look, we find who are those new customers that are trying out our industry as well. So those are the ones we got to engage with, and we have to engage with them through the medium that they're used to. And that's online, that's virtual, that's using maybe not Zoom, but certainly other platforms that are more engaging. So,
indeed, thank you. Yosef, your final closing thought, closing tweet?
My final thought, things are going to be back to normal. We're going to fly more in the future, and we're going to use less of Zoom. I tell you that. So that's my final thought.
Amen. Adrian, your parting tweet?
I would agree. I think it's going to, travel is going to come back. It's going to have to be more flexible with pandemics and social unrest and stuff. But generally speaking, I think face-to-face is going to return, and Zoom is going to be a backup rather than essential.
Indeed. Toby?
Yeah, I'll continue to agree, but be positive about Zoom. I think the last 18 months, one of the silver linings is kind of getting everybody up to speed with online calls. A lot of people are very skeptical. We're all very comfortable with them now. That's got to be good news for when it isn't practical to have that face-to-face meeting.
Good point. Tom, your thoughts?
I think it's going to be a mix. It's going to be a buffet. You're going to be using both of those elements at different times, where it's more appropriate. I think now we're coming into a situation where it's suddenly a luxury to be able to meet people again, to be able to read people, be able to break bread, have a drink coffee, whatever it is. and get to know that partner that you've only known virtually up until now. So I agree with everyone. Things are going to pick up quickly, and we'll choose the right tool for the right occasion.
Well said. David, last word belongs to you.
I agree with both opinions. I'll take Jeffrey. I mean, there will be kids that love to go and do a virtual visit of Venice, and then you have at the end they would love to see it in real life. And I agree with Joseph that they will jump on an airplane and go and visit. So I think we'll see the continued use of both tools.
Well said as well. I know that we are out of time. Sorry for going a couple minutes over, but I just want to take a moment and thank everyone for a lively discussion, including members of the audience. Thank you for your questions. Sorry, I missed a couple of them, but feel free to get in touch with anyone on the panel and continue the discussion via electronic means, and hopefully one day soon in person. Thank you again. Thank you, panel. Thank you, Alison and Lorna.
Thanks very much, Paul. And I'd like to add my thanks to our panel here. And as Paul says, to the delegates who bravely jumped into the fray to join the discussion today. So before we move on to our next session, I'd just like to remind you to keep putting any questions in the Q&A box rather than in the chat, so that we'll get to see them more readily then. We are recording this session, and we hope to have the recordings available by midweek next week, once we have our speakers' permissions to distribute them. So I'm going to hand you over to Alison now, who will introduce